Hi there and welcome to the ACSA Speaker Series. I'm Naj Alikhan. Today we are joined by Roni Habib, who is the founder of EQ Schools. Thank you so much for being here with us, and an educator as well. So perfect for this environment. Give us a little bit about your education background.
Sure. Yeah. So first of all, thank you for having me. It's a real honor to be here. So I started out as a teacher, a high school teacher. I started in Boston, but then quickly moved to Palo Alto and taught at Gunn High School in Palo Alto for 15 years. And very quickly into my time as a teacher, basically 3 years into it, to be honest, by my third year, I almost quit as an educator. I felt burnt out. But that year, I had a really intense wake-up call that one year, and basically, it was a tragedy. One of my students committed suicide, and that led me to really reflect about what am I doing as an educator, and do you want me to go into the details?
Oh, please, story? Yes, absolutely.
So, so that year, basically, I got to school one day, and I get out of my car, and I walk towards my classroom, and the intercom goes off, tells us we have an emergency staff meeting. So I go to the choir room, I sit down, wait to hear what's going on, and in comes our principal and tells us that one of our students committed suicide. And when she said the name, it was a big high school, so I was actually kind of hoping that it wasn't my kid, but it was my student. And that moment broke me. I felt totally shattered, and but I also had like 2 minutes, and I had to go support kids, right? Like we had to break it down to the kids and be there for them. So I kind of got into this do mode, right? You support the kids. And at the end of the day, his mother asked me to speak in his funeral. She reached out. And so that Saturday I go to the church, I sit in the first row, I see the mother speak about her child, and then the dad speak about his child. And then it was my turn to go up and speak, and as I was going up there, I was feeling pain, like right around the area of my chest, because I was feeling real anger and disappointed with myself for not seeing this child's pain. He was in my class for 6 months. How did I miss that? And even if I was fully healthy, I don't know if I would, I might have missed that too, but it was just a hard moment for me. So at the end, I said what I said, and at the end of my speech in the funeral, I basically had a moment. And I know this might sound a little Santa Cruz-y, tree-huggy hippie, but because I live in Santa Cruz now. But I literally I basically had a voice channel through me that told me if I'm going to continue to be an educator, there was nothing that was going to stop me from putting my students' well-being first. Nothing. And I told myself I'm going to teach them how to be well. But I was not well. And I needed to really check myself. And I actually went to a therapist. I started mindfulness practice in earnest, used positive psychology principles. My life transformed. In 3 months, I had more energy. I was more connected to my purpose. And then I said, why not teach kids some of these skills that I know as an adult that helped me transform? And so I created positive psychology. I was praying 25 students would sign up. It's an elective. 107 signed up. And that's when I knew that kids just want to know how to be well. And year after year, I've seen hundreds of these kids go through this program. I taught that class for 4 years, and then and during that time I was also in a leadership role in my school, and then basically I said to myself, hey, why not train other teachers on how to do some of the things that I do? And that's when EQ Schools was born, and it grew and grew and grew, and got a chance to work with more than 100 schools just in the state of California. And essentially what I realized through this journey is that we can give educators a lot of tools, but school leaders need tools, parents need tools, and most importantly, we need to walk the walk for the kids. And that's where I really began to focus on giving the adults the tools to create an emotionally intelligent climate for the kids that they surround themselves with, and frankly, for the adults to be able to thrive too and really live the life that they want.
When you refer to Be Well, you talked about the students when they signed up for your class.
Yeah.
There was an indication there that they wanted to be well.
Yes.
And educators in general, school leaders, teachers want to be well.
Yeah.
Well, how do you define that? How do you summarize the Be Well piece?
Yeah. To me, being well it's interesting. There's an acronym in positive psychology called PERMA. PERMA stands for 5 things: positive emotions, experiencing positive emotions, and ideally people who really thrive in the world have a 3-to-1 ratio of positive emotions to difficult emotions. Most Americans are close to 1-to-1. E stands for engagement, being really engaged, being in flow in life. So have you ever had the experience of you do something, but you didn't notice that time passed? You did it for 4 hours, but you didn't even notice time passed, right? That's when you're in flow. R stands for relationships, having deep supportive relationships in our life. M stands for being connected to our meaning, like why are we here? And A stands for accomplishments, but of intrinsic goals. And I think that when people take the time to, first of all, learn about these elements and really figure out how to not push to have more of these elements, but how to more reside in and experience more presence and more really being with the person that they're with. Like that's how we can deepen relationships. Really being with yourself and noticing like, hey, right now, am I noticing my intentions? Am I tuned into my purpose? Am I, or is what's happening for me right now doesn't feel in alignment, you know? Can I give myself the permission to be human and experience, sure, have more positive emotions, but still experience difficult emotions like shame and fear, and not try to run away from them, but learn ways to regulate myself and to almost welcome these emotions in and accept them as what's here. And I think so for me, being well is a combination of having social support, really being there for yourself and experiencing more peace and contentment in your life.
You talked about creating communities.
Yeah.
You and I have talked about that.
Yeah.
And but you've also we've heard this reflection from our members a lot. Leadership can be a very lonely job, a very lonely just existence.
100%.
And something that you've talked about, creating communities.
Yeah.
How do those work hand in hand?
Yeah, it's a great question. So I'll give you an example. For example, one of my, I just was supporting a principal a few weeks ago, and the principal was saying, look, like I was supporting him with making a decision that he had to make, and we both thought he made the right decision. It made sense. Now, of course, a lot of his constituents, teachers, parents and stuff, thought he made the wrong decision because they didn't have all the information. But he wasn't allowed to even share all the information with them because, I mean, legally he wasn't allowed to. And so it get to the point where, so that's what I mean when you can get lonely at the top, right? Where you're making decision and people's authority, like project their authorities issues onto you, and you have to deal with that, and you have to have difficult conversations with people who are your friends for 10 years. And so all these stresses and having nowhere to actually be able to really like open up and talk and be human and vulnerable and share deeply, like, and just say, hey, you know what? Right now I'm just feeling helpless, or I'm feeling hopeless, or I'm feeling really, tired. And so what we decided at EQ School is to say, look, we know that that's a reality that each leader faces at the school. And we also know that in most professional development environment, the space is such that the conversations stay relatively shallow, like they stay relatively at the surface, if that makes sense. So what we create is a container in which people feel safe enough and are welcomed enough to be able to come in and share in a joyful, even fun way what is actually really going on, and be able to feel heard, to feel seen, and gain skills to be able to express that more and hear others more. And what's beautiful about it is that as soon as they experience that sense of vulnerability and that sense of community and bond, they are then able to take that energy, you could say, and bring it to their campus and actually do that with their people. So their people feel most seen. Their educators feel more seen. If it's a superintendent, his principal or her principal feel more seen, and it just kind of propagates all the way to the kids.
Yes, absolutely. And you've traveled worldwide.
Yeah.
Are the vulnerabilities of educators here in the United States unique to those in other countries that you've had the opportunity to work with?
That's a great question. I think that I think there's a certain level of humanity to it all. Like I think there is a lot of more commonality than uniqueness. Because at the end of the day, I think what it boils down to is leaders and educators. You could say it boils down to that feeling of I'm not enough. Like I don't advocate for my kids enough. I don't advocate for my teachers enough. I'm not inspiring enough leader, or I'm not able to, like all these different things, right? That people think about themselves, and it stems from a lot of different pressures. These pressures also occur in South Korea for sure, in India even, right? In England and even in Kazakhstan and these places that I worked at. And one thing that I think is somewhat unique to California, especially to the Bay Area and to LA, is the pace. It's something that I saw in South Korea as well, but it's just those two places. I feel like the pace of life and quote unquote the focus on achievement, the focus on like, hey, start a startup, like you'll make a lot of money and you'll be happy, and that notion that success leads to happiness. Which, by the way, is it can be a very dangerous notion, because it's true that success leads to happiness, but a very specific type of happiness, short-term happiness. And we have the false belief that it leads to long-term, and that teaches kids that you just have to like do the right rat race thing. And I think I can sense it a lot more here than in other places.
ACSA is an organization that is student focused, big student advocates here.
Yeah.
But we are supportive of our education leaders in all facets of their work, in all instances.
Yeah.
Kids have evolved so much. The child that we see today was not the same as there was 2 years ago or 5 years ago.
Yeah.
Would you say that the role of the educator has had to ebb and flow on the basis of that, and then
Sure.
the vulnerabilities for educators are a little bit different than they were, say, a few years ago?
Totally. Well, there's so much that is, even let's just take technology, like there's so much that's changed with that, social media, for example. I mean, that alone, and in the ability to, connect right away, like with the phones, like that creates so much stress for school leaders and also for teachers, because you need to be on top of things, faster, right? Like when I first started teaching, if someone sends you an email, you can send it within 3 days, it wouldn't be a problem. Now like 3 days is like, what? And so that piece alone is it created a lot of change. But then there's also a piece around how important it is for teachers and for school leaders to be able to teach and model emotional intelligence skills to kids, because kids nowadays have a lot less of them than they used to in the past. I mean, frankly, like a kid could be on their device the whole day and not interact with anyone. And they need to be able to see their adults, be able to be socially aware, be able to manage relationships well, be able to be self-aware and emotionally regulate their own self, because I think that it's, unfortunately it's become more and more rare. There's a study that shows that level of narcissism has increased in the last 20 years pretty much consistently, while level of empathy have decreased consistently. It's like an X, and in teenagers and in college students. And so what we need to do is as much as possible reverse that by modeling it to them.
I heard you talk about students and when they're interacting with educators, and how educators sometimes are doing what they would normally do, whether they're just talking sternly, whether having a reprimand or something like that, and the student may not necessarily be there. And so, but then you talked about closing the lid, and I thought that was very interesting. Can you talk about the closing the lid?
For sure. So there's this concept of Daniel Siegel, who is an interpersonal neurobiologist, has this hand model of the brain, and I might butcher it a little bit, but the idea here is that if you have your hand, this part of your hand can represent the brain stem of your brain, okay, and which essentially is in charge of your breathing and all this stuff. Then if you put your thumb over it, this is the amygdala in your brain. The amygdala is in charge of making sure you basically, it's the organ that puts you into fight, flight, or freeze. Okay, the palm of your hand is the limbic system. It's your emotional reasoning part of the brain. Okay, so thumb is the amygdala, and if you put your fingers over it, your fingers are your cortex, right? And then your fingertips is your prefrontal cortex. Now we want our kids to be in their prefrontal cortex because that's where they can learn and everything, right? Honestly, we want our educators and our school leaders to be there too. The thing is that when a kid let's say they feel like they don't belong, because let's say they think everyone else is smarter than they are, which happens all the time, right? Or they look different, or whatever it is, you know what I mean? Or even if they're like just in their head, right, all the time. Usually when we're in our head, we're in the past or in the future, comparing ourselves to others, comparing ourselves to ourselves in a negative way usually. And when that happens, our kids have their lids flipped. They flip their lid, right? And when they flip their lid, they're in the amygdala. They're in fight, flight, or freeze. And it doesn't matter how amazing your lesson is as an educator. The first thing you need to do is to, number one, recognize, hey, is this kid's lid flipped? And as much as possible, can I imagine where this kid is at right now and see if I can assess it correctly? And if it is flipped, what can I do to help the kid bring it back down? And then teach, you know? And the things that bring it back down are a lot of the tools that we teach, not just educators, but also school leaders. So having connection rituals, playing together, having improv games that are fun but also put you in the present moment. People that play together work and learn better together. Other things are like mindfulness practices, you know, and really basically saying like, you matter to me more than the content. Like I don't teach disciplines, I teach people. And you're not a number, and I see you and I care about you. And when a teacher gives that to a child, you know, learning flourishes. When a principal gives that to a teacher, then you start to see the climate of the school really flourish. And then when a superintendent gives that to a principal, things usually flow.
But it can't be It can't be empty.
Oh, absolutely not.
It's got to be substantive.
For sure.
When they give that.
Yeah, and ideally, it should also be slow, like done in a way that is, you know, the person actually slows down enough to be like, hey, I'm actually going to take a moment and set the intention to slow down with you and be with you. And I'll tell you, it's way easier said than done. You know, like being a teacher for 15 years, the pace of the school is intense, and it's getting more and more and more intense. And so it's basically taking a stand and saying like, hey, you know what? I care enough about relationships that I'm going to put my foot down and say, no, like I'm going to slow down. I'm going to help my students slow down and really tune in to their emotions, tune into what's going on for them and connect with me. I'll share this story. I think it's funny. I don't know, do we have time?
Mm-hmm.
Okay,
Yeah.
So before I did mindfulness practices with my kids and also some of the improv games and the connection rituals and the positive psych stuff, I was really afraid, frankly, of a bunch of things. So first I was afraid the kids will think it's lame. I was afraid that, honest to God, I was afraid that parents would sue me because they think I'm initiating their kids into a cult. Okay, it's Palo Alto. I taught in Palo Alto, right? Like, it's pretty intense. I was afraid of losing instructional minutes, and I was teaching AP Econ at the time. Like, there's a ton of information, you know. So here's what happened: almost all kids not like it, but love having some time to actually slow down, and also to see their adult in the room, the educators, slow down enough and connect with them. And the reason for that is because their pace of life is so fast. Like, if you ever have an opportunity, go shadow a student for a day, go follow a high school student for a day, and see what their life is like. And you'll get the sense of like, okay, I get why they appreciate having a moment to slow down and check in with their body and really be present.
Probably because you know, students, a lot of adults probably think, oh, all they're doing is going from 8 until 3.
Right.
You know?
Yeah, but it's incredibly intense. You barely have a chance to use the bathroom. You have to, they're teenagers, right? Or they're little kids. They're managing relationships, like trying to do their best. You know, there's all these different, and then after that, they're going to sports practice, then they have their homework, and then they barely get to sleep because they want some time to have fun, and then they don't sleep enough, and it's this cycle, right? And so I think that as adults, we need to basically We essentially, in my opinion, just need to say, look, like, well-being matters more than anything, you know? And like, if I were to tell you, for example, right now, to close your eyes and to imagine the face of a child that you love, it could be your child, you know, your daughter, son, whoever, and just take a moment and imagine they're smiling at you. And then I were to just say, like, I want to ask you a question. I don't want you to think about it too much. Just kind of give me the first word that comes to you. What do you wish the most for this child? What do you want the most for them? The vast majority of people say happiness, well-being, content. That's what we care about the most, you know? And yet when it comes to school, where our kids spend most of their time, for one reason or another, happiness kind of gets shoved aside. And it's a mistake, because when people are happier and learn skills to be happier and more resilient, they're more productive, they're more collaborative, they're more creative, they're healthier, they want to learn more things, and they do learn more things. Academic achievements actually improve. And the foundation of our students' well-being lies in three things. The first is creating a climate of well-being and emotional intelligence around them. The second thing is the well-being and emotional intelligence of the educators in the room. And the third is and it's certainly not, last but not least, for sure, is the well-being and emotional intelligence of the leaders of the district and the school. And when we decide that we're going to prioritize these things, I've seen it over and over again, schools begin to transform. Equity gets optimized, literacy goes up, UDL adoption happens. I mean, like, all these different things that we care about so much as educators.
I'm going to ask you one last question.
Sure.
Yeah. For our viewers, for our listeners, is there a message? Is there like one message that you would deliver to educators at all levels?
Totally.
Really,
yeah.
That they can take away.
Yeah.
And improve, strengthen, you know, their toolbox of wellness and
totally.
All of that.
Yeah. So I think one of the, can I do two?
Absolutely. You're in charge.
All right. So I think the first is give yourself the permission to be human. And what I mean by that is when difficult emotions arise, stress, fear, overwhelm, helplessness, hopelessness, whatever, a lot of times what we do is we end up repressing these because we don't want to judge ourselves for having the emotion itself. So it's already hard to have the emotion there, but then there's a layer of judgment on top of it. Like, oh, I shouldn't be feeling afraid, or I shouldn't be feeling helpless, or I shouldn't be feeling tired, or whatever. And when you take a moment, step back and just say, hey, can I give myself the permission to be human here? Because frankly, everyone feels shame. Everyone feels fear. Everyone feels guilt. Everyone feels envy. And just allow yourself to recognize, yeah, I'm feeling it because I'm human. The only people who don't feel it are psychopaths and dead people. So it's a good sign if you feel it. You know, it means you're alive and you're not a psychopath, you know? And just be really kind to yourself as you do that. The more you do that, I think, so if the educator's in the classroom, it's like the lesson doesn't go well. Hey, it happens. How much can you soothe yourself in that? You know, for school leaders, I'm not able to affect the change I want. Okay, so you really want to affect the change. You have this desire, maybe you have shame around not being able to do it, fear by your supervisor or whatever. How much can you welcome that in for just a bit, just a moment, and not beat yourself up for feeling that way? So that's the one message. The other message is you're enough. You are enough. You know, I think so many of us just think that we're not enough. We don't do enough. We don't affect enough change. We're not inspiring enough of a teacher. We're not inspiring enough as a leader. We don't, whatever it is, you know. And I just think it's really important that we remember to give ourselves this unconditional love and to realize that, sure, if we all have areas of growth and we can recognize the areas of growth, but from a place of compassion, from a place of like, yeah, I can grow there just like anyone can grow, and but I'm going to go from it with kindness. So
there you go.
Yeah.
Sounds good.
Yeah.
Ronnie, thank you so much.
Really appreciate that.
For being with us.
Thank you.
And you've been watching the ACSA Speaker Series. We invite you to see more of our content at ACSA.org.